The Miami Heat have reached the halfway point, so it's time to ask some big questions about the second half of the season, including where does Kyle Lowry fit in? Who's Miami's best option at backup center? And if a big trade is going to help Miami's chances of reaching the playoff, it's 5 burning questions on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcast, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. 5 burning questions about the second half of the Heat season. Here's where we stand after the first half. The Heat 21-20, 8th place in the Eastern Conference, 2 games behind the Pacers for the 6th seed. The best that we've seen them all season is just 2 games over 500. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. Everything about this team, in other words, David, this is a 500 ball club. They're 24th in offensive rating. They're 8th overall in defensive rating. That offensive rating is really dragging Miami's net rating down, their point differential down. They have a negative point differential in the season. There's definitely signs of positivity with this team, things that are trending in the right direction. The defense has been really good, especially over the last 20 or so games. But going back to the offensive side of the ball, as much as Tyler Herro has progressed and Bam Adebayo has made a leap on that end, and Jimmy Butler remains, when available, as consistent as he's always been, I think a lot of people are wondering where Kyle Lowry fits into the Heat's offense. And you and I discussed this after the loss last night against the Brooklyn Nets, where Kyle Lowry scored 4 points. And I know a lot of people look at that point total, and you made this good point where, you know, Kyle Lowry's never been a big scorer. It's everything else that he does that you need to appreciate. And I do believe, and I agree with you. But I'm starting to wonder where Kyle Lowry fits into the Heat's offense, because 4 points is still probably not enough. And I think a lot of people are wondering, okay, if this is an offense that's going to trend towards more so than ever Tyler Herro, Bam Adebayo pick and roll, and then getting Jimmy Butler his spots when he wants them, and Kyle Lowry is so happy to just get guys involved and be as deferential as he's always been in his career. Where does he really fit in to the Miami Heat's offense, this version of the Heat's offense, not the one that they planned on running when they acquired him 2 summers ago?
I don't know that he has a clearly defined role, and I think that's part of the problem, right? He continues to be the primary playmaker, but it's a role that's been reduced, right? As Tyler Herro continues to get more opportunities with the ball in his hands, as Bam continues to be an offensive hub, Jimmy, you've got this versatility on offense that kind of takes some of the pressure off of Kyle from having to be the central playmaker. And that's fine. Maybe that's just where he's most effective. I think he's also getting plenty of offensive opportunities. He just hasn't been knocking those down. And that's what's most concerning, is that I don't know that there's any schematic change that Miami could make other than just cutting him out of the lineup, completely reducing his minutes considerably. That's going to change whatever his current role is. He's still getting to the rim, or he's still attempting drives to the rim. He's still taking his 3-point shots. He's still doing what he can as a playmaker. The shots just aren't falling, and he's not producing, and therein lies the problem. So I'm not sure exactly how Miami can maximize what they're getting from Kyle until such a point in time when those shots start to fall, if and when they ever do.
He's shooting 33% from 3-point range right now. That's simply not good enough. It's below his career average, but it's also expected with a smaller aging point guard where you don't get as much lift on those 3-point shots as you did at one point in your career. Like, this is just what happens when you get a little bit older. So I don't know that this is something that is just going to come back around for Kyle Lowry. We could be seeing the steady decline of Kyle Lowry. In that respect, lower usage might be good for an aging player, but it really, like, where you reduce some of his role. But then when you do that, you're hoping that when he does get the shots, when he does get the looks, when you are asking him to do things, that he can step up. And he did have that stretch earlier in the season where he carried Miami's offense, and that's worth mentioning, that he won Miami a few games that they otherwise didn't have any business winning, games where Jimmy Butler wasn't available, Tyler Herro wasn't available, and all these other things. So you commend him for that. But when you're looking long-term and where the Heat are going, just in terms of who they want to empower offensively, who the stars on this team, who they're building around. It looks less and less to be Kyle Lowry. Here's some stats for you. Kyle Lowry has the lowest usage percentage of his career since he played for the Houston Rockets. I think a lot of people listening to this program right now didn't know that Kyle Lowry ever played for the Houston Rockets. That's how long ago that was. It was the 08-09 season. That was the last time Kyle Lowry had a usage rating this low. He has taken 10 or fewer shot attempts in 22 of his 36 games this season. He needs to shoot more. If he's going to shoot more, it's probably going to be off the ball the way that Miami's offense is being run right now. And he's not, to your point, making those shots. So he's not taking those shots. And that's why I remarked last night when we talked about it after the game, he can't just be Draymond Green point guard Miami Heat version. Like, the Heat don't have enough scoring in there on their offense to facilitate a Draymond Green. They can't. Draymond Green could be Draymond Green on the Golden State Warriors because they have Steph and Clay, and in the past, Kevin Durant, and now Andrew Wiggins, like guys that could put up 20-plus points per game. The Heat don't have that many guys that could do that.
You really think Kyle shooting more is the solution? Because I can already imagine
shooting better. I think he's shooting less.
Okay, because you specified more, and I'm already imagining half our listenership going, "What are you crazy?"
He's shooting less because he's not shooting very well. I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
He can't. But he also can't go out there. He's your starting point guard on an offense that needs points. He needs to shoot better, and then that needs to lead to taking more shots. He has to also take more shots, but you need those shots to go in. Like, the Heat can't have this many guys who are this deferential and don't score. They're 25th in offensive, or I'm sorry, 24th in offensive rating. They need everybody to contribute, and it's not all on Kyle Lowry. We're going to get to some of the other pain points later on in the show, but if he's your starting point guard and the guy that's making as much as he is, all that stuff that he does, we're not taking away from that. Defensively, he's still very good. Offensively, the way that he could just create points out of nothing, fast break points off of made baskets, the way he could do that is second to none. It's remarkable, and you still appreciate him for being able to do that, and his ability to get guys organized on the floor and point guys in the right direction. All that stuff is helpful, and he's a net positive for the Heat. I'm not saying that he's a negative either. I still think in crunch time, you want him on the floor, but you also need to figure out ways to help him score more. If he's not going to have the ball in his hand, he's third on the Heat in pick and rolls ran per game behind Tyler Herro and Jimmy Butler. That was the same as it was last year, but he was more effective when he did it last year. That's not new for Kyle Lowry, but they need to just figure out where he is on the offense, because I'll say this, David, if they can't find a role for him, if they can't find a way for him to be more productive offensively, then they have to look at maybe what the future looks like without Kyle Lowry.
That's fair. I mean, I think we're going to see, now that Gabe Vincent is healthier, I think we'll see an uptick that kind of falls in line with what you're talking about. As far as the shooting is concerned, I was wondering also, I know we didn't really look into this, and it's something that we probably could have, but is he taking more corner threes? Because it feels to me like he is. And if that's the case, maybe that's kind of, again, in line with what you were talking about before, that he just doesn't get the same kind of lift. He's going for the short corner, which is an easier shot to make. It feels like he's taking more corner threes than he has in the past. And maybe that's the next evolution, because I'm trying to think, how can he continue being that scoring option when he is so limited? Like, he's not going to be able to knock down mid-range jumpers because, well, he's too small. Like, he's going to get that shot blocked. He's going to go to the rim, but he's not particularly as effective there as he once was. And if that three-point shot's not falling, then I don't know what options you have. And that's a concern if there's no realistic way for him to continue adding new wrinkles to his offense at this point in his career. He is going to be a detriment out there, especially if his playmaking's been diminished. And even last night, a costly turnover late in the game because he just forced an entry pass that didn't need to be made there. So I think there are issues there. And at the same time, I remain optimistic that Kyle can figure it out. Like, I don't think there's any questioning the mental aspect of it. I think he's engaged. I think he's fully on board with Miami winning this season, for all the complaints about maybe he's not there or maybe he's just not as effective. That's fine. I don't think it's anything to do with his mental preoccupation or anything like that. I just think we're seeing, as you said earlier, the decline of an older player.
You raised the point about the three-point shooting from the corners there. He's taking 17% of his three-point attempts, or I'm sorry, 17% of all of his shots are coming from the corners. That's more than basically any point of his career. So basically since Houston, which again, he played for the Houston Rockets one time. He's only making 41.5% of those shots. Last year, he shot almost 45% from the corner. The year before that, 48% from the corner. So everything's down. Shooting wise, it's all down. So I know we'll get to some trade talks later on in the show, but if this version of Kyle Lowry, they acquired Kyle Lowry to be a point guard, to run their offense. That's what they envisioned when they acquired him 2 summers ago. They are not using him that way anymore. And if I'll say it again, if he's just going to be basically Draymond Green light for you, I don't know that player has a place on the Miami Heat right now, on a Miami Heat team that's trying to get out of being a 500 ball club right now. They need help. They need size. They need scoring. We're going to get to all that stuff in a little bit, but Kyle Lowry's not giving you size, and he's not giving you scoring. So I think he's still a really good player. I think he's one of the best 80 players in the NBA. I think he could be very helpful to the right basketball team. I think he was really helpful to this basketball team at a point, and I still think he is. But if you're going to keep going in the direction where you're going to give more and more stuff to Tyler, to Bam, where you're going to expect more from Jimmy as you get closer to the playoffs, there's going to be even less opportunity. Victor Oladipo, there's going to be even less opportunity for Kyle Lowry. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, if you're the Miami Heat, what purpose does he serve? And how are we serving Kyle Lowry by putting him in these situations too?
Is benching him an option?
No.
Too many people suggest that it is, and I agree with you. I mean, I brought up that point.
He's still a net positive, but you're not getting the most out of a really good player is sort of my point. I don't think the answer to not getting the most out of a really good player is benching a good player for a worse player. I just don't see that as the answer.
Many people don't see Oladipo as a worse player. And
you were mentioning Oladipo. You were talking about starting Oladipo in over Kyle Lowry?
Yes.
I wouldn't go there either. I think Oladipo serves a purpose. He balances the lineups. I'm not ready to start Oladipo, but maybe I'm wrong. All right. The other lineup question that we have is backup center. It's what we're going to talk about next. Do the Heat have an issue there? And is there something that they could even do about it? Maybe not. We're going to talk about that next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's so easy to use. It's so incredibly simple. It's just you taking the players that you want, basically 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, that's how you can win up to 25 times your money. If you want to take Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points, and he goes out and scores 28, you win. That's it. That's how so simple it is. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including the NBA, of course, the NFL, as long as it lasts, Major League Baseball, the NHL, college football, men's and women's college basketball, Euro basketball, disc golf. I didn't even know you had projection for disc golf, but if you want to make a wager, you certainly can using PrizePicks. And 60 seconds or less, it's that easy, safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Sorry, the other 20 states that aren't available. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 if you use the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you back $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com today.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Let's get to our next question. 5 burning questions for the second half of the Miami Heat season. How do the Heat handle the backup center minutes going forward? This has been a huge topic of conversation. Right now, it's basically varies between Orlando Robinson when he's available on this 2-way contract and Dwayne Dedmon. The Heat with Orlando Robinson are on average outscoring opponents by plus 1.8 points per game. You compare that's second only to Bam Adebayo on the Miami Heat. Dwayne Dedmon is a minus 3.2 per game. The Heat are being outscored by an average of 3.2 points per game with Dwayne Dedmon on the floor. So the swing there is 5 points per game. That's pretty dramatic. Granted, Orlando Robinson has only played in 13 games. It's a small sample size, but we like what we've seen from Orlando Robinson. He fits. He does all the right things. He's a good rebounder. He makes himself available on the roll. He's been a very productive player for the Miami Heat. Looks like another one, another gem that they've found. The problem is the aforementioned two-way contract and the fact that he only has 22 games available, I think, left on this two-way contract. So if you just decide right now as the Miami Heat, hey, Orlando Robinson, we're elevating him to our backup center spot, you're not going to be able to play him for the full second half of the season unless, of course, you promote him to the 15-man roster. Do the Heat have a plan to do that? If so, I guess maybe you could just figure it out at that point. But if you're not sure you're going to be able to do that, then maybe you do just try to save Orlando Robinson for at least the stretch run of like the final week so that you're not burning through all these two-way days. Basically, what I'm asking, David, is what do the Heat do here at backup center?
Well, I don't think they have the same plan as they did last year with Caleb Martin. I don't think they're going to offer him that contract. Not yet. Not barring any kind of major roster shakeup where they do trade a player and they can't afford to do so, because they've made it pretty clear they're not going to go over the luxury tax, and they're certainly not going to do so for Orlando Robinson. And
yeah, you made a good point. Can I just make one point here? The Heat have about $200,000 in room before the luxury tax. In other words, not even close to enough to sign Orlando Robinson. I know some people have asked us about a prorated contract. At what point does it become feasible? And I think this was Barry Jackson, the Miami Herald reported, it'd be like 10 days left in the season, at which point the Heat would be able to fit the prorated minimum, Orlando Robinson under a prorated minimum. So that's something that might be possible, but that leaves a pretty big gap if you're going to promote Orlando Robinson to your backup center minute give him those backup center minutes full time now. That still would leave a large gap between the time that those 10-day or that the two-way contract days burn out and the time where you are actually able to promote him to the 15-man roster. So I hope I explained that okay.
Yeah. I think we're all basically just biding time also until Omer Yurtseven returns. And I think that's the big question mark here. This was never supposed to be a case where Dwayne Dedmon was supposed to play this many minutes, and nor was there going to be an opportunity for Orlando Robinson on this roster, which is why he wasn't part of the 15-man roster to start the season. And they knew what he was. They sent him to Sioux Falls in the hope that he would continue developing and get work, and he would be the third option as center once they made a move with Dwayne at some point. Unfortunately, Yurtseven has missed the whole season. We haven't seen what he's going to be capable of. I would hope and expect that he's going to be more competent than either Robinson or Dedmon, but that's a big if. I know they're taking their time, but foot injuries can be dangerous, especially for legit 7-footers. Like, those kind of issues can continue to crop up over the course of their career, and you don't want to hinder him this year, the next, or down the road, just so you can try and get something more out of the position at this point. So I think basically you just have to write it out with Orlando, because he's just a better option than Dwayne Dedmon. You can't trade Dedmon.
So you say, screw the two-way problem there. Just write it out, figure it out later. If you burn through the days, you burn through the days.
Yeah, because I think you can get this much out of him in the short term, knowing that Yurtseven is waiting in the wings and eventually he'll return. He can't be, he could, I guess, in theory. He's unlikely to be worse of an option than either a limited injured Dwayne Dedmon or even Orlando Robinson at this point. So I think.
No, I think I'm with you. The other thing of it, and by the way, Yurtseven, it's probably going to be February-ish that he does come back at this point, it's looking like. So that gives you a couple months of Omer Yurtseven, right? And so I think you can afford to do that with Orlando Robinson. The other part of this too, and as much as we love Orlando Robinson around these parts, if you burn through the two-way contract days, you can just waive them and sign somebody else to a two-way another center, and then use that player. Maybe there's somebody that they're developing in the G League, somebody that they've got their eye on. That's worst case scenario. But as we know, like they did with Drew Smith and Orlando Robinson, this back and forth, that two-way spot does not in fact impact your overall cap. So that spot is very flexible. So if you really, really have to, and you burn through Orlando Robinson's two-way days, and he's just not an option for you because you literally cannot play him under the rules of the two-way contract, just waive him, sign another center, and then you've got somebody there at the two-way contract. The question there becomes, are you willing to accept Orlando Robinson possibly getting snatched up by another team? Do you view him as maybe a long-term answer as opposed to a stopgap right now while you're sort of waiting for Omer Yurtseven to come back? And obviously, do you have somebody else in mind that you are ready to bring in and think that can contribute right away this regular season? So some options there. But we'll see how. I think ultimately, they need to figure out a way to offload Dwayne Dedmon. He's got a non-guaranteed contract next year. He's basically free to waive next season. Can you do something that the way the Celtics moved Noah Vonleh and cash to the San Antonio Spurs, basically paying the Spurs to waive Vonleh so it didn't impact their cap, and they were able to create some room and create some space under their salary cap and before the luxury tax? That's copy and paste what the Miami Heat probably need to do with Dwayne Dedmon. With the Indiana Pacers, the last time we talked about this, I told you I don't know what other team could facilitate it the way the Spurs could. I investigated it a little bit, talked to some people. It looks like it's the Indiana Pacers or the Spurs. The Spurs could still do it. They have so much room under the salary floor, they could still get there. So the Spurs or the Pacers would be the teams to do it. The Pacers have a James Johnson contract that's worth a little bit less than $2 million, I think. It's completely non-guaranteed this season, where Dwayne Dedmon's contract is non-guaranteed next season. So could you do a swap right now where you trade Dwayne Dedmon and like $5 million in cash to the Pacers, basically paying the Pacers to take Dedmon and ride out the rest of this contract and waive him this summer? You bring back James Johnson's non-guaranteed deal. We love James Johnson, but you'd probably waive him right away, and then that would create enough space to promote Orlando Robinson. That could be an option. Again, the question is, are the Pacers down to do that? Who knows? All right. Is the three-point shooting an issue, or will it eventually rise back to Miami's average? This is our next question, David. Here's some stats really quick. So the three-point shooting problem. The Miami Heat last season shot 37.9% from three-point range. That was first in the NBA. This year, it's 34%. That's 26th in the NBA. So they went from the best three-point shooting team by percentage last year to a bottom 5 one this year. Here's the other part about this. And I found this interesting. And I don't know that this stat has been out there. The Heat last season gave up 33.9% shooting from three-point range to opponents. So opponents shot just under 34% on threes against the Heat last year. That was the second best mark in the league. This year, opponents are shooting 36.7% on their threes against the Heat. That's 27th in the league. So when you talk about math in regards to the NBA, the Heat are on the worst version of this math problem. They are on a bad side of this. Last year, they couldn't have been better, right? They were shooting them at the best rate in the league, and opponents were making them at one of the worst rates in the league against them. This year, it's been completely flipped.
Inverse.
The Heat are making them at almost one of the league worst rates, and opponents are draining threes against them at one of the league best rates. I don't know what to read into it, is the thing. This is a sort of variance that happens, but over the course of last season, you kind of feel like that variance would eventually sort of even out, and I kind of felt like, yeah, the Heat gave up the threes that they wanted to give up, and they had a bunch of ignitable guys that made threes. That made sense. This year, I don't know if the Heat are more what they were last year or if they are more of what they've been through the first 41 games of this year. It's really hard to put a finger on why it is the way that it is, because defensively, they're still pretty good. I don't think that they give up a ton of really easy three-point looks a whole lot. So maybe, is it just a variance thing, I guess is my question.
I tend to think that it is. And I think, we're kind of, as great as Caleb Martin's been, I think, the PJ Tucker factor is certainly worth pointing out. Like, he did allow Bam to be out on the perimeter a little bit more. Like, he did not have to hedge into the paint as much, knowing that you're giving up a substantial amount of size whenever they do switch, because he was such a great Tucker, was such a great switchable player that you knew that he had your back covered. Like, if you let a big slip towards the rim, PJ was going to be able to pick him up. You could stay on the perimeter, guard somebody there more, a smaller guard or a wing player, and defend much more accurately there. And I think that's at least you could also close out more effectively.
Well,
too,
I think also how much zone the Miami Heat used this year, because there is no PJ Tucker and they don't want to switch as much without PJ. That's it's daring opponents to shoot those threes, and they're making them at that rate. So that's also part of it, to your point. The other part too is, I think defensively it'll even out. I'm actually not that concerned about defense from the three-point shooting perspective.
It's the making the shot that's the problem.
It's the making the shots that's the problem. Max Strus this year is shooting 34.4% from three, down from 41% last year. Duncan Robinson was actually shooting right about where he was last year, but it's down from 2-3 seasons ago. Gabe Vincent shot 37% last year from three-point range. He's 29.8% this year. I know he's been dealing with the injury, but that's his percentage.
Kyle
Kyle Lowry's also been down. Everybody's been down. Kyle Lowry was 39.2% Oh, I'm sorry. That's a different stat. Hold on. So I want to focus on Max Strus and Gabe Vincent because everybody's down except for basically Tyler Herro and even Caleb Martin. But Caleb Martin's been a little bit down since dealing with this injury lately. I don't know if last year was an anomaly for Max Strus and Gabe Vincent or if they're actually good 3-point shooters because these were relative unknowns before they both kind of blew up last year. Last year, like I said, Strus shot 41%, but you go back to 4 years before that in his basketball career, 33.8% the year before last. Not good. 30.8% the year before that in the G League. Not great. In college, 36% at DePaul and 33% at DePaul. Fine, not great though. So the fact that he shot 41% last year was a vast improvement from where Max Strus has been his entire career. And there are reasons for that. He talked about it. He quickened his release. He polished it. He normalized it on a shot-to-shot basis. All these things you thought, okay, this was Miami's developmental program at work. But it's not been the case this year. He has moments. The shot looks good. I think he's probably closer to that 41% three-point shooter. But again, based on where he's at his career, last year was the anomaly, not the rule. Right? Gabe Vincent, kind of same thing. 36.8% last year, but the year before that, 30.9%. The year before that, 22%. In college at UCSB, he was actually pretty good. 37%, 33%, 38.5%, and 41.6%. But that's in college against UCSB competition, University of California, Santa Barbara competition, not the best competition. So I don't really know, in other words, why it is that the three-point shooting is where it is. I don't think that anybody really knows. I think it's a question that the Heat front office has to be asking themselves is, hey, do we think that guys like Strus and Vincent are going to revert back to the mean the way that they were shooting last year? Or do we think that last year was an anomaly and we got to actually go and find guys who could space the floor around our core players because these guys ain't it? You and I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does. I don't even think the Heat do. I think the Heat have to ask themselves if they have enough patience to figure it out. Because the other thing, too, is that Strus and Gabe Vincent, this is the last year of their contracts. So if they don't snap back to where they were last year or some meaningful mark of improvement, they could just let them walk in free agency. And if you're going to do that, do you consider just trading them now before you let them walk away for nothing?
Well, I think that's certainly an option. That's absolutely on the table. But, I mean, we do have to play devil's advocate here, or we have to at least imagine what the Heat front office's answer would be. And I tend to think that they'll explore whatever opportunities available to them in terms of a trade. But I also do think that they expect those players to bounce back. That because of Max's ever-changing role from starter to bench and back and forth and playing with different lineups and somewhat of a different comfort zone than whatever he was in last year, I believe the expectation from the front office would be that he will normalize to a certain degree. Maybe not to the same level as he was last year, but that he'll continue to get better. And similarly with Gabe, you can always chalk that up to injury. I think there are bigger questions about Kyle and others taking a step back. But again, the hope is that if at least one more player or maybe a couple players start knocking down the three with some more regularity, that opens things up for others. It changes the way the defense has to play you and things of that sort. And then you wind up getting easier shots, looks that maybe you can potentially knock down. So
I tweeted this yesterday. I said, hey, it feels like the Heat play a lot better when the three-point shots go in. And I know that's kind of obvious and stupid, and it was meant as like a snarky tweet, but it's very true. Like, to your point, the Heat need that three-point shooting to go in because their best players are not three-point shooters. Jimmy Butler is not a three-point shooter. Bam Adebayo. These guys need space created for them, and then all of a sudden everything just works more smooth, and the offense has more flow. The Heat need these three-point shots to go in, and if these guys aren't making them, then you got to go find guys who are going to make them, because I don't think the Heat's front office is very patient. And given that these guys, it'd be one thing if they were under contract long term, and maybe you say, you know what, let's just write it out and see what happens.
Yeah,
but they're not. So, all right, the third quarter, we're talking about Heat issues. This has been a big one, but it's not as big as some people think it is. We'll tell you why next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsors.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. Still your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and so much more. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, You can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today's episode also brought to you by TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Full service products only. Video meeting with an expert is required. So see guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guaranteed.
Reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram. You can email us, lockedonheat@gmail.com. Continuing along with our 5 burning questions for the second half of the Miami Heat season. This next one is, how can the Heat fix their third quarter issues? So here's a stat that's been making the rounds today, David. The most double-digit leads lost in the third quarter this year. The Miami Heat are tied with the Los Angeles Lakers with 11 double-digit leads lost in the third quarter this year. Here's the interesting thing about that, David.
That's right.
The Heat have actually won 6 of those 11 games in which they've lost a double-digit lead. So they've clawed back after losing a double-digit lead, ultimately winning these games. The Miami Heat have played more clutch games than any team in the league this year. That's in large part because of this kind of stat, because of losing double-digit leads. They are winning double-digit games, they're winning games by double digits at a much less frequent rate than they did last year. I think last year they won like 30, 31 games by double digits. This year it's like 10. So not a lot. Obviously, halfway through the season, you could do the math. Even I could do the math. That would be like 20 by the end of the year. Still a lot less than what they had last year. So it's been a problem, but not so much of a problem that they've actually lost games. It's more of just a frustrating issue for the Miami Heat and Miami Heat fans. Also, something to be said about, well, if you're losing a double-digit lead, the flip side of that is if you're winning by double digits, maybe you're able to rest guys. You're not dealing with as many injuries. There's a lot of things a lot of ripple effects of this kind of stuff. That said, no team wants to have this issue. You don't want to tempt fate, not when you're a 500 team like the Miami Heat are, basically. So you don't want to lose these double-digit leads. So I found some more interesting stats for us, David.
Okay.
I think it comes down to shooting. It comes down to scoring. Again, defense, you can have a bone to pick with certain things on defense. Should they switch as much as they do? Do they need more size? All this stuff. They're 8th in defensive rating overall. The Heat are just fine defensively. They're good enough, I should say. It's the offense that's the problem. Here's where the Heat are getting outscored. Here's Miami's point differential by quarter. The point differential in the first quarter is 0, meaning they're playing their opponents even every first quarter on average. They're winning the second quarter by 1.6 points per game. They're losing the second quarter by 2 points per game, again, on average, the third quarter. And then the fourth quarter is even again. So they're playing their opponent to even in the third quarter. Their three-point shooting in the first half is 38%, much higher than they are for the season. 31% is their three-point shooting in the second half. They're making 3.6 threes in the first. So 38%. That's a different stat. 38% in the third. I got a whole bunch of stats on this on my notebook. I'm getting confused. All right, so let's drill down into the three-point shooting percentages. In the first half, here's where each player shoots in the first half, and then I'll tell you in the second half. In the first half, Max Strus, 36.5%. In the second half, 33%. Lowry, 39% three-point shooting in the first half, 27.5% in the second half. Caleb, 41%. Second half, 36%. Duncan Robinson, 34.5% in the first half, 30.9% in the second half. Gabe Vincent, 33% in the first half, 24.5% in the second half. All of Miami's shooters from the first half to the second half get worse. I did more stats, but I don't want to get into the numbers here. But basically, the quality of looks that the Miami Heat get in regards to wide open, tight coverage, all that stuff, it's all available on the NBA.com stats site, is the same. It's basically the same from first half to second half. And then I even look back to last season when the Heat were the best three-point shooting team in the league, and it's also the same. So I go back to this. It kind of goes back to our last thing that we're talking about with the three-point shooting and the third quarter stuff. I don't know that any of it is all that explainable other than I think we think that this stuff is a large sample because it's been so long. A half a season feels like it ought to be a large sample, but it's really not. And sometimes just stuff is weird and your dudes miss shots, and you look at the problem with the three-point shooting and the third quarter issues that have been cropping up for the Miami Heat, and it comes down to this. The Heat are not making enough shots. And I don't know that this stuff evens out, but I don't know how much time the Heat have to wait to figure out if this stuff is going to even out.
I'm trying to think, in all the years of us covering the team, I don't know that we've ever seen anybody ask or get a specific pinpoint answer from Eric Spoelstra about their third quarter issue.
I wanted to ask him. I thought about it walking away last night, and I was like, damn, I should have asked him about the third quarter stuff.
Not in a loss like that one where he was pissed. Like,
there was a lot of stuff happening at the end of the game. Oh, should we mention, by the way, that the last 2-minute report came out for the Jimmy Butler thing, and they said it was just marginal body contact, no issues. That they did not blow the call, according to the NBA officials. So, in case you weren't upset enough as a Heat fan after last night's loss, there you go.
I tend to think that the numbers, it's not that they don't mean they do or don't mean something. It's valuable and it's something tangible too. I mean, you just illustrated the fact that you can't just reduce it to make or miss league, and the fact that they make so many in the first half and miss so many in the second half and then just dismiss that. And I think that's something that I tried to quantify even before you returned back to the show. Like the third quarter, even though during those couple seasons, those COVID impacted seasons, they were long, they were exhausting. They play the first half with such energy and purpose and sharpness. Like the passing is so much more fluid. Their offense, like any tweet that you've seen from any Heat fan when they go, now this is Heat basketball, guaranteed that was during the first half. They just played better during the first half.
Yeah.
And then eventually at the second half, I tend to think, one, they're tired. Two, something that Jimmy Butler has alluded to, that they take your foot off the gas. Bam has said it. Kyle has said it. They pointed it out before. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case, but
I think it's the same thing. I think taking your foot off the gas is being tired. I don't think the Heat willingly just say, no, we got it. It's the third quarter.
Right. That's what I'm trying to dismiss. I'm trying to penetrate. You're right. I think like they're not consciously going, oh, we're up 20. We don't give a damn anymore. I don't think it's ever quite that way, but that's just how the players tend to explain it, is we take our foot off the gas.
No, you look, and I think it's fair. Like as a player, you look back and you're like, man, if I just should have played a little bit harder, but it's so easy. It's easier to have that regret walking off the court than it is when you're on the court and you're exhausted. And I know that the Heat are the best conditioned team and all these things, but it's like what I wrote for The Ringer.
It's overstated.
It is so hard for them to win. They have to play every game like it's a playoff game to win games in the regular season. And it's really hard to do that. And this team is old and it's injury prone. And and I know that everybody says, well, once we get healthy, this team is built to get hurt. This is an older team. It's the second oldest roster in the NBA with a lot of guys with injury issues. Them being hurt is the rule. Them being fully healthy is the exception with this group. And it has been for 3 years now. That's what this team is. And when you're asking them to play so hard all the time, it's exactly what you're saying, David. You just get tired. Even with the halftime break, it's like 5 minutes, dude. That's not a long time at all. It's exhausting to play for the Miami Heat.
They cool off to a certain degree. And I think conversely, the opponent can figure things out. Like they make adjustments in a way that the Heat team can. It's like we gave it our best shot in the first half to give us just enough of this cushion so that eventually in the fourth quarter, as you pointed out, statistically, we can hold our own and maybe eke out a victory. And I think that's where the talent disparity comes into play too.
Yes,
other teams tend to be more talented. And I think that's an issue. It's like
it's easier. It's easier
team.
For other teams to get through the first half than it is for the Miami Heat to get through their first half. And by the way, I can already... This is not like, okay, Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, like stop being so militaristic about what you're doing with you're running them too hard. The point we're trying to make is if they don't work as hard as they do, they lose more games than they're winning. They have to work this hard in order to just win games. That's the way. So that brings us to our next and our final question. The trade deadline is a month away, February 9th. Do you think that the Heat will be buyers or sellers? And what do you think that they're looking for? And I'm just going to go ahead and answer this because I think you already did. Talent. Just a way to make. Could you imagine if you just had like a talent like Kevin Durant who could just glide through a game and score 32 points on any night? Like the Heat just don't have that guy who just makes everything around everybody easy. They don't even really have a guy who demands a double team the way that KD did last night, or even Kyrie Irving. They don't really have that player right now. And I if they had that dominant force that ultra uber talented player who just rises above everything else. Jimmy Butler isn't that until the playoffs. And even in the playoffs, he muscles his way through everything. I think that's sort of what they need. But then you could also say every team needs that. Even teams that have a lot of that could use more of it, right? It's the rarest, most novel thing in the NBA is superstar talent. Everybody wants to acquire more superstars. So that's an obvious thing. But when you're looking at specific needs, David, what is it that you are looking for?
Well, I think we alluded to it following the Heat loss last night against Brooklyn. You know, something more akin to like an athletic big. Someone not quite a tweener size. I love Haywood Highsmith's energy, and I know that Heat fans are going, "Oh, he's hard to watch because he's still so stunted as a player, et cetera." I get it. At the same time, we've talked about this consistently since the preseason. He does bring an energy. I don't know any other player does as effectively. Like we see Bam do this, but Bam's much more polished as a player. Highsmith, at the very least, is just he's out there and he wants to make an impact. I just think he's stopped by his own physical limitations and the role that he has to play on his team. So I would like something like a taller version of Haywood Highsmith, somebody that's more like 6'8". You just need more size on this team because you're just going to get beat up. Rebounding wise, you're going to get beat up.
Do you think that they need more size and replace Caleb Martin in the starting lineup, or are you looking size off the bench?
I would prefer. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think
it's hard. It depends on the player, I suppose. But like ideally, would you be looking for a starting power forward?
Yes, I think so. But I also feel like Caleb's done enough to earn and keep that job. So you'd have to get a pretty significantly more established and capable player. And that's
and whether or not that who knows if that player's out there. It's a good point, right? Like if you could somehow get your hands on a Harrison Barnes, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know that Sacramento's shopping. I don't know that Sacramento's a seller right now. They're fifth in the Western Conference right now. So something like that might not be even available for the Miami Heat, Harrison Barnes or otherwise. So I'm with you. Size is definitely a need. To me, it's not their number one need. And I know we've talked about it and everybody's talked about it. And I think they're kind of glossing over something that we've basically spent the entire show already talking about. The Heat need shooting. That is their number one need. Miami's starting lineup, Caleb Martin has done a good enough job as the starting power forward where I'm like, you know what? That's probably our second need. I think they need help in the front court. Maybe not even to supplant Caleb as a starter, but just, to your point, like, is Haywood Highsmith really going to be your backup four? I think he's more of a 3. I don't think that he's a 4. I don't know. I think you can use more size. You could obviously use something behind Bam Adebayo. That's not Dwayne Dedmon or a guy on a 2-way deal, right? Like that stuff is definitely a need, and it's a high priority need, but not as big of a priority as just give me somebody that could put the ball through the net on a night-to-night basis. This ignitable crap with Max Strus and nobody's been igniting, okay? Like, even Max Strus the other night made his first three-pointers in the game and then missed 6 in a row, all right? That's not a good percentage overall. I need better, right? So I get a guy that could put the ball through the net that you trust, that doesn't have to ignite, that just is. He's not ignitable. He just is a three-point shooter. That's the player that the Heat need. Who that player is, I don't know. You can start going through the list of the top three-point shooters in the NBA, and you quickly end up at Buddy Hield, Zach LaVine, these kinds of guys. I don't know if they're available. I don't know if the Heat have what it would take to get these guys. You can go down the list even further. A guy like Malik Beasley from Utah, is he somebody that makes sense? He's right now in the top 10 in the league in three-point shooting, coming off of the bench for the Jazz. He is available for the Utah Jazz. They're probably looking for draft picks. If you're the Heat, you have so few draft picks would you part with a first from Malik Beasley? I don't know that you would, right? So it's tough.
There's another Beasley out there. You brought up Hassan Whiteside. Bring back Michael Beasley's for his sports.
Is he alive? I don't even know.
Oh man, that's rough. Yes, he is.
Okay,
he is.
Michael Beasley, Carmelo Anthony. These guys are not I need guys who are in the NBA.
All right.
Playing basketball.
Garrison Matthews, right? He's always torched Miami. You could pry him out of Houston.
Maybe. I mean, I would hope that there's something between
Davis Bertans.
I would hope that there's something between getting Damian Lillard and settling for Garrison Matthews. Can we find something in between there? If you're the Miami Heat.
Killer King, Garrison Matthews. You are so dismissive. Unbelievable. That guy. That guy's the best shooter Miami's ever faced. That is a Wade Ellington contract waiting to happen, I'm sure.
Tim Hardaway Jr. is out there. Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Atlanta Hawks. The other Bogdanovic, Bojan Bogdanovic from the Detroit Pistons. Here's another name for you. Jeremy Grant. The Portland Trailblazers, after a hot, surprising start, not so much anymore. They're 19-20. They're 10th right now in the West. Jeremy Grant is on the last year of his contract. I from what I am hearing from people who are plugged in, I have not heard of this from any other sources, but people who do have sources and are plugged in, they kind of keep just throwing Jeremy Grant as a, not saying he's going to get dealt, but he's probably a little bit more available than people think. The Heat fans are upset that they didn't trade for Jeremy Grant in the offseason. They could get a do-over here and potentially have a chance to get Jeremy Grant. Would you part with a first-round pick and whatever contract it took to go ahead and get Jeremy Grant? He's shooting like 40% from three. He's a good cutter, good defender. I'm with you. I would probably say yes, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the first-round pick, great. You got your first-round pick of the future, Jovic, to already develop. I don't know that you can afford to. And again, Miami's system continues to find ways of getting young players and helping them reach the next level. You've already got these undrafted guys. Like I know the draft.
And Grant's young. It's not like trading a pick for like the Kyle Lowry or PJ Tucker acquisitions. Like no, like Jeremy Grant's young. You could trade a first-round pick and say, hey, we got a guy in his prime for 3-4 years.
Right. You get longer, younger, more athletic, and fits every need that Miami has in that sense. Like it's a no-brainer. If they are,
my only question would be: do you think the 3-point shooting is sustainable with him? Do you think it's real, or is it just a function of playing on Portland?
I don't know
the way
that
they
I
space the
even
floor
care.
and things like that. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you don't.
I don't know. At this point, it's a better option. Like just because of everything else he does, that's a guy that you'd have to watch. Like right now, who's defending Caleb Martin out there? Who's defending Haywood Highsmith? That's 4-on-5 basketball. It puts Miami at a disadvantage. I think at least Grant, by virtue of the 3-point shooting being an option, sustainable or not, and I know that's a big if, is going to get some opportunities to dunk, cut at the rim, etc., make Miami's offense more dynamic. Can you incorporate him? Can he share the ball effectively enough where he can be a part of Miami's offense when everything is clicking and humming and it's rolling well? I tend to think so.
And didn't Portland only trade a second-round pick and some contracts for him?
Yeah,
my point is, if you're the Trailblazers and the Heat are coming to you with a first-round pick, well, then you basically just traded a second-round pick for a first-round pick, right?
That's fair.
And so if you're Portland, you're saying, yeah, you know what? For a guy that we think might walk in free agency, we just turned a second-round pick into a first-round pick. That's a pretty good deal for us. You could sell yourself on that if you're Portland, and that's why, by the way, I think that's why people think that he might be a little bit more available than general consensus thinks, is because Portland barely traded anything for him, and if they want to keep adding to this young, like Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony, they got a good thing going long term potentially in Portland. Maybe you want to add more draft picks to that whole thing. I don't know. It's if you're the Miami Heat and you have any regret about not chasing for Grant harder, you might be able to make up for it here before the deadline. Just a name to throw out there. All right. We went long, but I think we covered a lot of ground here. Hit the big questions that are facing the Miami Heat in the second half of the season. The second half gets kicked off Tuesday night at home against the Oklahoma City Thunder. We will have our post game for you after that game, and then the Milwaukee Bucks are in town for a home series on Thursday night and then on Saturday afternoon. So we will recap those games for you as well. But for now, thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for joining me, David.
You got it, Wes.